I'd like to welcome everybody to Vancouver Hardware Meetup, our quarterly speaker series and networking events. To give you a bit of background for today, we're a forum for local hardware developers, product developers, engineers, makers, entrepreneurs, and funding angels who pull together minds from all corners of the hardware community in Vancouver to help connect makers to funders. Since the beginning of 2020, we've shifted from in-person events to online events, which has helped expand our community. So we've been hosting these online events that have been bringing in people from many different locations around the world, especially for our speakers. And we'd love to know where people are joining us from today. So if you want to just leave us a message in the chat to let us know where you're joining from today, that would be great. And I am Madison. I am the organizer of Vancouver Hardware Meetup. To give you a code of conduct for today, we are committed to providing a harassment-free experience for everyone at our events, regardless of gender, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, age, or religion. So any comments in our live chat of a harassing nature will not be tolerated, and anyone violating these rules will have to be removed from the discussion. To give you a little bit more information, this event is organized by MistyWest. I personally work at MistyWest as a graphic designer, UI UX designer, and do content creation. MistyWest is a Vancouver-based engineering design consultancy that exists to create novel technologies that enable a healthier planet and bring prosperity to all humankind. We focus primarily on projects that advance the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and have the potential for high impact. Some examples include projects for wildlife tracking devices, underwater handheld sonar scanning devices that search for drowning victims, and wearable indoor particle sensors for monitoring indoor air quality. So today's event is making a positive impact through data and emerging tech. Our conversations are going to be centered around research, information, data science, and how we can implement that to basically make better decisions for the future and for our planet, and what technologies are being created to help advance a more sustainable future. Joining us today, I'm very excited about this whole lineup. We have Dr. Anita Gupta, who is an aerospace engineer, rocket scientist, and the CEO and founder of Hydroplane, which is a company that is essentially a clean aviation engineering company that is utilizing hydrogen for the aviation power. I just did a terrible job at explaining that, Anita, I'm sorry. We have Carpenter, who is the CEO and founder of Braid. Irene Atkins, Futurist and founding partner of AlterX. So all of the women that are joining us today all are involved with using science and technology and data to make better and more positive decisions for the planet and for our future. And our moderators today are Allison Fowler, who is a senior producer at Core 77. Core 77 also partnered with us for this event. And Oleha Riden, she is a principal at MistyWest, so my colleague. And this is essentially the end of my introduction. I am Madison. I am the content creator, community manager at MistyWest. And can give you a little bit of today's session breakdown. So once I'm finished here, we're going to get about 2 minutes from each panelist who are going to give you an introduction that's more detailed than what I just gave, a 40-minute panel discussion that is moderated by Oleha and Allison, followed by around 25 to 30 minutes for an audience Q&A. And then the remainder of the session will be our thank yous and announcements if anybody has them. And that is the end of my opening slides, and I'm going to hand it over to everyone to give their introductions. And I will stop sharing my screen. All right, whoever wants to go first.
I can go first.
Awesome. Thanks, Anita.
Hi, I'm Anita Gupta. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. I'm really happy to be here with everyone today. I've really enjoyed doing these virtual events over the pandemic because it allowed me to connect to people and also meet so many new people. So I might have actually met more new people during the pandemic because of these types of meetups than prior to. So it's great that you're doing it. In terms of my background, I'm an aerospace engineer by training. I spent 16 years of my career working for NASA, specifically on the robotic exploration of space, landing the Curiosity rover on Mars and developing landing systems for Venus and Earth's reentry. After that, I decided to focus in my research at the University of Southern California, where I'm a professor of astronautics, and I also teach inter-descent and landing systems. And I'm also a green transportation entrepreneur. I spent 2 years an executive at Hyperloop, Virgin Hyperloop, which is a green transportation technology. And then I decided to do my own thing and became a co-founder of an electric vertical takeoff and landing company, and now founder of a hydrogen-powered aircraft technology company where we're focused on developing a new type of hydrogen fuel cell power plant for aircraft, starting with small aircraft, but eventually allowing it to be able to provide the powertrain for larger aircraft going up to regional air travel. I'm also a very active pilot myself. So the aircraft that we're developing, I will be able to test fly and hopefully fly people around. And I'm actually almost done with my commercial rating, so I'll even be able to do that for hire at the end of it. So really happy to be here today and talk about how we can use emerging technology to resolve our biggest crisis or existential crisis, which is climate change. And whether that's ground transport, transport in the air, or even transport to space, it's really important that we develop these new technologies moving forward. So thank you and looking forward to the discussion.
Okay, so I'm Ann Carpenter, CEO of Braid Theory. Our company, we're a venture advisory firm working with early stage engineering and science-led entrepreneurs focused on a variety of sectors from ag tech and construction, biotech, ocean technologies, ports and transportation. But a lot of it all coalesces around the blue economy. And so we have a really good alignment of the number of companies that we work with that are heavily aligned with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And so I will definitely bring in that aspect. My background is I actually started as a software programmer in the aerospace industry and ended up actually being involved in mergers and acquisitions, acquiring companies, spinning out companies from aerospace that had that were originally designed for a Department of Defense, but had commercial application. I then ran my own marketing and design firm for many years. And Braid Theory began about 5 years ago, where we really looked at some gaps in the market to support a lot of the industrial sector applications for bringing new tech and new ways of thinking in I will call it what we like to term a post-clean tech world. So you really think all the technology is there, but now how do we actually use it to solve hairy, audacious goals, as some people like to call it, like food security, like saving the planet, climate change. And that's me. Thank you.
Awesome. I'll go next. I think we had we were talking about doing intros via alphabetical order. So I guess I'm last up here. So my name is Irene Atkins. I am the founding partner at AlterX. We are a technology design and incubation company, literally focused on altering the future of everything, the future of self. Think about future forms of self-enhancement, the future of social and social systems, right? So how we connect, how we relate to one another in our world, and the future of space, not necessarily the space that Anita works in, but space in terms of our physical world around us. And I think that does ultimately will include kind of some off-world amazing kind of projects as well. Essentially, we are focused on designing and developing and spinning out these paradigm shifting tech ventures for the mass consumer market. That's really what our core focus is. So when I say the mass consumer market, I'm kind of focused on, it's like i.e. humanity at large, right? So you think about companies like Apple, you think about companies like Airbnb, Uber, that kind of ultimately are positioned for technologies that are ubiquitous, right? That are found in kind of every corner of the planet. That's really the types of companies that we're spinning out. A little bit about us: we're less kind of organized as a corporate entity. We're less of like, that's not really our culture. We're more so organized as an investment and incubation group. So really just a kind of a collaboration and a group of powerhouses and power players in very different spheres. Some of us work in venture, some of us are designers, scientists, folks that are really just coming together to essentially incubate the future, right? The future must be incubated, and that's essentially the work that we're focused on, is creating new solutions by leveraging emerging technologies to create, mass paradigm shifts. So I'm excited. This is like the conversation that I've been wanting to have for some months. So I'm happy to be here and excited for the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Anita. Thanks, Anita and Irene. And yeah, if we can do a little bit of an emoji round of applause, it'd be awesome, because I'm really excited about this panelist lineup. And thank you so much for joining us. My name is Oleha Riden. I'm with the MistyWest crew. Educational background: I started in pre-med and then transferred into environmental science. My passion for sustainability led me out west. Industry experience, I've worked for government, worked for private sector, and I've been in tech for the past 8 years. That 8 years has been spent, working on building and growing MistyWest. And for those of you, who don't know or aren't familiar, MistyWest, we kind of work on early stage product development. And a big thing for us is doing technology development that has a positive impact. And so we've really kind of attached ourselves to advancing the UN SDGs. So really excited about this topic, really excited for everyone who's able to show up. And thank you again to all the panelists. And Allison, I'll let you kind of.
Thank you. First of all, very honored to be among the group today and have the opportunity to kind of pick everyone's brains about what you're up to. My name's Allison Fowler. I'm a senior producer at Core77.com. We are an editorial platform that focuses on news that centers around the practice of industrial design. So I help run several programs, including the Core 77 Design Awards program, which is a competition that celebrates outstanding design in the industry, as well as events like our Core 77 Design Conference series. And we also have a job search platform for designers called Coreflot. I'm really excited to kick off this discussion today. As we mentioned a little bit, we're going to be talking about different ways that people can use research methods and emerging technologies to tackle important issues we're dealing with today, whether that has to do with climate change or social issues. Our panelists have pretty much touched all of those areas. But the question we're trying to answer this afternoon is, how can we demystify how tools like data and the implementation of emerging technologies can be applied to create positive change in the world in a way that's more efficient and effective than it ever has been before. There are a lot of really inspiring individuals, teams, and projects where people are applying revolutionary methods and powerful tools to more rapidly expedite the development of projects. And these stories can really give us hope for how humans are contributing to and perhaps correcting for growing environmental and societal issues. Some of the takeaways we want you to leave with today is an understanding of the tools our panelists have used on very real projects to achieve their impact goals, what a future where these technologies are employed may look like, and then hopefully through these examples you can envision how data and emerging technologies can help shape some of your own role-changing products, not mine. We want to help shift perceptions of data and deep research, not just as an abstract collection of insights, but as information that reflects a three-dimensional reality and can help build real physical products that are really exciting, at times very futuristic, and of course, powerful and intentional. So I'm excited to get the conversation started, and we're going to get a question going from my co-moderator, Oleha.
Yeah. And yeah, so this first question is for each one of the panelists. You can answer in reverse alphabetical or however you like. I know for intros we went alphabetical. So yeah, there are many ways to use data science and technology for social good. So, example, volunteers or open source communities creating a data product that is free or subsidized, nonprofits using data, educational programs building technical capacity in underserved communities. What does using emerging technologies for positive impact mean to you? And can start with you, Irene.
Definitely. I mean, this is something that I think about often. When I think about emerging technologies, right, you think about AI, you think about biometrics and biosensors, you think about XR, you think about quantum computing. When I think about these emerging technologies, I just keep thinking about like the miraculous possibilities that they hold, right? I think about the potentiality of what can be created. And so when I think about emerging tech and impact or positive impact, I feel like they're just inherently inextricably linked, right? Like I don't even kind of see that there is a dichotomy between emerging technology for impact and just emerging technology. I think it's really all kind of wrapped in one because these are transformative tech. These are transformative technologies. I think about like, it's almost like if you had the keys and the codes to really eradicate some of the most like terrible aspects of our human experience, right? If you had the ability to do that, right? It's like, why wouldn't you? And I feel that we as designers, as makers, as entrepreneurs, as investors, as folks that are building in the emerging tech space, we have the power to ultimately fulfill the promise of these miraculous technologies. And so it's kind of like, if we're not leveraging emerging tech for impact, what are we doing it for, right? What are we building and creating it for? I think about how technology is literally like the most scalable force on this planet, and I think about emerging technologies as really having the potential to just create worldwide change, worldwide impact. And so when I think about the two, when I think about emerging tech and impact, I just feel like they're in the same vein. They're almost the same and tied together. That's just the way that I conceptualize it. And I feel like it's about having that framework and that lens for all of us as makers, as designers, as builders. We have to kind of have that framework and that lens that these are technologies that can literally change our entire planet and our entire human experience here on planet Earth or on Mars or on the moon, right? And so it's kind of like we have to be leveraging these technologies for impact. I feel that we have the power, right? It's like we do have the keys in the code. And so we have that responsibility to see what we're building through that lens.
Yeah, I like that optimistic view and pairing them together. Anne, yeah, if you want to go next.
Okay,
Curious.
thanks. So we work in so many different sectors that when I was trying to think about how to really coalesce the conversation for today, this being the decade of the ocean, we do a lot related to SDG 14, life underwater, and ocean tech, and a really big issue when you think about emerging and data is how little we actually know about the ocean and information about the ocean. We know more about mapping of Mars than we do of the seafloor. But what does that actually translate related to positive impact, for example? So some examples of the kinds of companies and kinds of solutions that we work with would be, for example, there's a lot of initiatives to protect 30% of the ocean by 2030 and turn them into marine protected areas. But how does that impact communities? Well, first of all, when you look at data, there's a lot of work around understanding where is the best way to protect a community or a marine area for sea life. Well, if you're protecting that, what about the local communities that depend on the fish for their main source of protein? How does that translate? How do you protect it? How do you create jobs? How do you actually think about how people can have a sustainable living? And how does that data then help feed into that? And understanding of systems. And so when I think about technology, the tools have always been there. We have lots and lots of sensors out in the ocean. We have data collection tools. We have scientists doing work. The technology is all available. Irene mentioned some very specific examples. But what is most interesting about why now is the fact that we can think about solutions not in siloed, like how am I feeding my own community, or I have this problem on this island, but it's more of how can I learn by what's going on in the entire planet, so we can think very systems oriented on how we're solving issues around climate, around food security. So this sense of going from just data for data's sake for scientific research to really look at solutions impacting sort of a closed environment, to really thinking about like that DIKW model, from data to information to knowledge to wisdom. And as we move along that path, the data scientists, it's a really important role to play, because you now can really look at patterns way beyond that current contract that you might be working on. And you're also seeing societally a lot more collaboration, especially in the ocean space. Because if you're an entrepreneur doing any work in the ocean, your market is not local, it's global. So you're having, at the same time, you're having the technology available, you're having the huge explosion of folks working in the data space, but you also have this awareness that there's a bigger goal. So I guess that's where I'll start.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for that. I like that you also brought up, I'll add it maybe to the chat later, the DIWK model. Yeah, and Anita, to get your thoughts. And yeah, so this is sort of what does using emerging technologies for positive impact mean?
Yeah, so I think it is so important, and I echo the comments of Irene and Anne in this area. And from a very personal decision for myself, I became an aerospace engineer because I'm a huge science fiction fan ever since I was a little kid. So all I ever saw was these potential future realities, and I'm more of a utopian science fiction fan than a dystopian science fiction fan. So I wanted to actually become an engineer and make technologies to facilitate, these alternative universes where we could, travel throughout space and meet alien species. That being said, you can use technology, you can use disciplines of engineering, computer science, et cetera, to build the future that you imagine. But what's really important, though, is what does that future look like? Who are we building it for? And that's where I think your conversation comes in. And what's so important to me as an individual now is to make sure that the technology that I develop is actually going to help somebody else. It's actually going to make an impact to the planet, at large. And of course, I love working in the space program. It was really a wonderful part of my career, but we're spending a lot of money. It's not necessarily going to solve challenges here at home. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. And so I think when we make decisions as to how we invest, when we make decisions into what we prioritize from a technology perspective, do we want to make things simply more convenient? Do we want to just do something because it's cool? Or do we want to create new technology to solve challenges? And so it keeps on coming back for me to this challenge of climate change, to the way that we can use technology to reduce our carbon footprint. So there's a direct link, just like Irene said, between all of these new emerging technologies, all the technology which is being developed, if we do it right, to solving the challenges that we have here at home. And the other aspect to that, of course, is that it has to be affordable, it has to be accessible. It can't just solve problems in one portion of the world. It has to solve problems all over the world. And I think a great example of that, though, in terms of emerging technology rapidly coming to the forefront, is the development of the mRNA vaccines. And by definition, it was funded by governments, and it's intended to be distributed across everybody across the world. And because of that emerging technology, we were able to solve the pandemic. So yeah, there isn't a better example, I think, of this than the vaccination rollout.
That's great. I think what you brought up around the idea of looking at the future and like your inspiration of sci-fi bringing into your work is great to move us on to the next question of, what I think it's great to go into specifics now after we've been in the abstract of what are specific technologies that you're perhaps really excited about. And then also that question of, contextually, how can we talk about like what's possible now that maybe wasn't even 10 years ago that you're seeing emerge? Let's start with Anne.
Yeah, sure. So there's so many areas where technology is now available. Let me come up with a couple of them. When it comes around ocean, huge amount of changes in communication technology, energy, and those two alone. Okay, so Anita's working in hydrogen space. I just got the opportunity to tour called the Energy Observer that's been going around the world, where they're actually using seawater through a desalination process to then create hydrogen to be able to power this boat around the world, in addition with solar and wind, so that it can be moving completely 24 hours a day around with just what elements are available in nature, right? So when you look at that, that opens up literally the ability to collect data from anywhere on the planet at any time. When you look at anything from Starlink to underwater communications, the ability to move data around, that is a huge, a huge leap. Another area that I would say that is just been really very instrumental in being able to make very complex decisions is really looking at AI as a tool for human-centered decision making, and based on predictive analytics available through the AI tools that are out there now. So it's this combination of being able to rapidly look at the possibilities to then bring in human expertise to make decisions. So those are just a couple of opportunities in the biotech area. In synth bio, there's, you're talking about vaccines and such. There's so many areas also in ocean, but I'll stop here.
I want to kind of get into that with Irene soon, but Anita, I wanted to ask you, since you're part you've been part of so many different innovations over the past 20 years, whether that has to do with land transportation or literally going to space. So what's motivated your work, and what are you most excited about in terms of innovations over the past 10 years?
So I think for me now, when I look at the way that I could make the most impact, and the way I think in general that governments could make the most impact, is by looking at energy production and then energy storage and energy carrier. So anything that has to do with decarbonizing our energy usage, I think is the key. And from that, we actually can look to the space program for inspiration, which is obviously almost all spacecraft use solar panels as their primary means of energy storage. And I guess they get too far out, like past Jupiter, but even the Juno spacecraft is still using solar panels. And then, of course, how do you convert that energy? How do you store that energy? So I am interested in technologies related to that. So I think on the ground, we have the option of solar, we have the option of wind, we have the option of geothermal. And I too went on the boat tour 2 weeks ago, the Energy Observer, and they had to kick me off because I was asking so many questions and they had to let the next tour group in. And so you can see how it actually couples really nicely to maritime, to aviation, to ground transport. Any technologies that can help to decarbonize our energy production, as well as how we use that energy, is what's of most interest to me. And because I'm now focused on aviation, because there's a lot of work that's going on for ground-based transportation, which can use batteries because it doesn't have the same gross takeoff weight limitation. But for aircraft, you cannot use batteries. It doesn't work. I spent 2 years in the space, in the eVTOL space, and you're really range limited. You can only basically fly for at most 1 hour. And there's very few people who can find use in a 1 hour flight, with the exception of like an intercity transport. So for me, I wanted to focus on technologies that actually really decarbonize aviation, and that has to come from hydrogen. And it could be direct hydrogen with an internal combustion engine for a jet aircraft, or it can come from electrochemical energy conversion, which is in a fuel cell. So I think anything which is related to helping us to decarbonize in all the different ways that we use energy, because everybody uses energy for everything, I think to me is what is most important to me, and that's what I'm focused on now. And the good news is the space program has done a lot of work in all these areas. So we've made a lot of progress in that way. But in order to make it affordable for everyone to use, we have to have economies of scale. You have to have rapid adoption. That's where you have to have governmental involvement, private investment, and lots of new startups and companies in space.
Perfect.
And just to piggyback off of what Anita was saying, you still, the whole conversation around the decarbonization of shipping is so critical right now. It's going across all sectors, and it's going directly through Irene, just to kind of say that conversation is really flowing a lot by that end customer that it's us that are saying, wait a minute, this impact of shipping everything around the planet is, we have to rethink. And so brands sort of driving a lot of that conversation. I'm involved in an organization. I'm on the board of a group called the Smart Freight Center, which really does then look at that about how can companies, whether it's a Heineken or an H&M or whoever it might be, how you can most efficiently and sustainably move the goods around the planet. And so you have the hardware side and the technology and the changes around the energy production and fueling. And then you also have all the efficiencies. And then you have where the customer is requiring and pushing the envelope for the companies, the multinational corporations, to do the right thing.
Irene, if you want to talk, go ahead.
For sure. I was just going to, kind of segue into what Anne was saying around the importance of the consumer. I feel like there's a lot of excitement happening on the consumer side with consumer technologies and emerging tech, right? And kind of the possibilities that can be created. I think about what was not possible so many years. I think now with emerging tech, we have the ability to literally truly shift the paradigm of how we live, of how we connect to one another as human beings. You think about, it's very much so about it enables us to really change and enhance our quality of life. It enables us to like live better, be better. You think about technologies around like precision medicine, for example, right? You think about like Viome is a really great example of being able to have more data around our bodies, what's happening inside of us, right? To have data around that. And you talked about data of understanding what's on the ocean floor. I think it's, it's kind of parallel to where it's like we can have that level of like precision and understanding around what's happening within ourselves. And how could that completely like transform our lived experiences, right? To know kind of what exact foods really do fuel us, not just the foods that are healthy for us that we all kind of know, but what foods really do fuel us, like our precise chemical makeup, right? Being able to understand that and know that allows us as consumers to actually consume what we need to be healthy. So I think about like emerging technologies like that. I think about an emerging technology that we worked on within AlterX, which was actually our first kind of inaugural and like flagship project. It was called Meta, and Meta is. Oh, I hope Anita can join us back. I hope she'll hop back on. But one of our projects is called Meta, and so Meta is a sensory immersion meditation device. And so it enables us to. It's literally the intersectionality between meditation and ancient meditative practices and mindfulness with immersive reality. There's other groups that are working on these types of solutions, but just imagine being able to, almost, be able to delve into deeper states of meditation more effortlessly through this technology. That's a whole realm that hasn't even been fully explored yet, really, about what that could do to our human consciousness, how that could allow us to access these deeper states of meditation more easily, right? And I think it just enables us to be better. I think about at AlterX, our huge kind of research area around the future of self. I think there's just like amazing possibilities as to how we can, emerging tech, even robotics, how that can alter us. Right? And then I think about the realm of social and social systems. This is like big and kind of top of mind and really high priority for us now. You think about emerging tech enables us to kind of move faster and to truly break down the silos, right? I think about networks, right? Just at kind of a mass systemic level. I had this thought. I said, what if we don't really actually have an unemployment issue? What if that doesn't actually exist? What if it's simply the infrastructure through which people are getting connected to economic opportunities? What if that is broken? And so we're developing a solution, which is going to be a spin out coming very soon. We're really excited about this one. But it enables people to get connected to economic opportunity effortlessly. I mean, it completely tears down the entire, concept, the entire paradigm of resumes, of cover letters. It just is killing that off and completely disrupting that. And it enables people also, those that are opening up opportunities, and not just in the 9-to-5 realm, right? Beyond just employment. That's just one segment of the economy. We're talking opportunity in terms of the spectrum of opportunities. And so it enables those that are looking for human capital to be able to more readily connect to the right kind, the right fit, the right people or the right person for the opportunity more effortlessly through AI, right? And this is what's really exciting is that, you think about quality of life and everyone always says like your network your network is like your net worth, right? I want to completely disrupt that. I want to break that down and say, you enable and we create technologies and solutions to where we can widen our network, right? It's just, I think the opportunities are limitless, right? We begin to have a more inclusive and a more global and a more fair and equitable society. So I think about on the consumer side, there's a lot too. Like Anne talked about communication, right? Communication is huge. I think about our social fabric at large. And I feel like it has been disrupted through big tech and through social media like Facebook, like Instagram. I think we are connected to all, yet connected to no one, right? It's that feeling we've all been feeling for some years. And I feel like emerging technologies can enable us to almost heal our social fabric again and be able to more easily connect and deeply connect to our people, to our folks, to friends. Like it can enable us to create and find, right? We're working on another solution that is about connecting people to what I call we call this match mating. It's like connecting people to their already existing mates in the world, which is really exciting. I believe that through technology, those kinds of possibilities can be created. So I'm excited. There's a lot of exciting things on the consumer side that we can talk about too.
And you know what, Irene, some of the things that you were saying, a lot of it is that be more efficiently using these resources, whether it's human capital, like when you gave your employment example, is do we really have unemployment issues around the world, or do we just have bottlenecks and things aren't distributed right between the skills that people have and where they need to be just deploying these skills? When it comes to transportation, that's not all that different when you think about it. And I think one of the things about positive impact is we no longer can be a society where we look at everything as this limited into. But if we think about it in terms of how do we make better and real decisions about how we use the resources, whether they're the human or whether it's minerals or whether it's energy, I think that's something that is very critical in thinking about whoever's developing solutions is to not think in terms of wasting, because we don't have unlimited resources.
Definitely. I think what you said is like earlier is like we have the tools are there, right? The tools are there. It's just about what are we applying? What is the application through which we are creating these solutions? It's all about the application. I think the technology is very advanced, but it's like how we're applying that, how we're creating and designing solutions is everything. It's in that space where I think the promise of these emerging technologies can really truly be made, it can be fulfilled, is how are we applying this? It's that space right there that I think is super critical. It's the application of everything.
And you made a comment about, sorry.
Oh, one thing I was going to add was I totally agree with you. I had some technical difficulties when I made it back. And to add to what Irene was just saying is it really requires leadership too, right? Because right now, if it's all at this lower level, with the engineers and the computer scientists and the investment people, the venture capitalists, it's all over the place, right? Which means it's not necessarily being rolled out in any kind of efficient way. It's great from generating, new intellectual property. It's great from generating new ideas, but there does need to be leadership so that we can make some really conscious decisions as to how we implement circular economy models in some sector, or how we have carbon credits or carbon offsets. And so I think that's kind of what's missing. And I think you do see a lot of sort of like decisions being made by governments which are more politically motivated, perhaps well-intentioned, but still politically motivated, which means it's not necessarily focused on the end goal of really decarbonizing something. So if we could come up with a better plan as to how all these new technologies could be applied and rolled out over a period of 10 to 20 years, we could make so much more progress. And so I hope conversations like this will get everybody thinking, and we can start to do that at our different countries and things like that and come together globally.
And
I like how
you bring up a really good,
Go ahead, Anne.
there's a little delay with I was just going to say is that's the other part. If we're going to truly make positive impact, it's not just the technologists that need to be a part of the conversation, right? Irene, you mentioned about, meditation, your meditation one, and looking at ancient practices and so on. You have a lot going on in regenerative agriculture or the fishing, so on, of kind of this blend that all voices become a part of the conversation, because otherwise technology by itself isn't the solution. It's how you apply the technology from the emerging tech itself, whether it's energy generation, storage, etc., or communications technology, the data layer of understanding the metrics around it, but shaping the conversation, the goals of where you want it to go, crosses over beyond just like the individual VC money or the government ruling, but really starting to have these like larger stakeholder connections of like who's using it, what communities are impacted by it, how do you implement where you're not screwing something else up while you're fixing one thing.
Definitely. I think that's why it's important for more organizations to design themselves and organize themselves in a way where we are more inclusive, right? I think we have a tendency to kind of be in our box. Like for example, AlterX, we started out just in the venture space, and I quickly began to start seeing that wasn't the end all be all, and that wasn't fully the model that I wanted to create. I wanted to create a more collaborative entity where people from different disciplines can really come together, different entities can, ultimately be a part of the solutions that we're designing and developing. And I think that's where we have to break down those silos. I think about between the public and the private sectors, right? I want to see more collaboration coming together on that front. And I think through AI and through these solutions, we'll be able to, like I mentioned, like networks, to be able to kind of connect to one another more effortlessly. And I think that's where we're going to see a lot of changes when we have these organizations coming together with different stakeholders and different players from different perspectives really joining together. And like you said, this is work that is global. This is work that affects us all. So we have to kind of bring together all of our different networks. It's not just the public sector, the private sector. You also think about like the arts community, right? You think about the creative community. Like we have these major silos in our world right now. And I think when we come together, or we have entities or models that kind of enable all of us to kind of come together and play together and kind of collaborate, where the magic is going to happen.
I'm wondering if it's getting to be around Q&A time. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, and I want to talk about all this for hours and hours. But this is a fascinating conversation, and I want to know more about like specific applications and how you're using these technologies specifically in your work. So should we move on to questions, or should we?
We probably could, or maybe if you want to, ask the final question, because I feel like the conversation sort of kind of fell into solutions-oriented kind of approach anyway, so we can kind of skip some of the hurdles that everyone's facing and then kind of maybe tackle them in the Q&A, because we want to make sure people can ask some questions. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll tackle this question quickly, but one thing I think is kind of interesting about this conversation is how these tools can be utilized to shape future outcomes potentially. For example, data can be a tool where you analyze current information to make predictions for the future. And then emerging technologies, something like AI or blockchain, is this technological structure that people can shape their ideas or the future around or build around. So we wanted to ask, each of you how you use your methods of research and development to focus on, exploring the future and, potentially even influencing future outcomes. I don't know if someone feels compelled to answer that.
I can go first, and I can kind of go really quickly too. So essentially at AlterX, we have an operational subsidiary. It's called Enlighten.io, and that is our intelligence arm. Enlighten.io really focuses on what we call futures intelligence, right? Which is data that pulling together can help us to understand and have some signals as to future possibilities, right? And so what we do is we essentially are tapping into our intelligence unit, our intelligence arm, to help us understand and create priorities and also know kind of what exactly to build, right? What to incubate, what areas or what kinds of, it's about, for us, what we do at Enlighten is really pulling together global conversations, right? And thinking about kind of like the voice of the market, really getting a sense and listening, using data to really listen to the market and understand where are some growing and emerging needs, right? A lot of times before it's even becoming prevalent, right? We're able to kind of parse out like what are the needs in the market and how can we design solutions that meet those needs. And that not only enables us to create these spinouts that are what we call 18 plus months ahead of market, right? It enables us to really begin to kind of design and dominate the future, which is really important. There's a ton of upside, I think, when you're futures focused, and have a very clear methodology in your organization for how we're leveraging that data to create. And that's going to enable us to win in the marketplace. That's super important, but it's also to design these solutions that are enable us to kind of meet the need and create solutions really before they become an issue. And for us, that's about mitigating suffering. It's like, why, if we're hearing, right, our intelligence unit at Enlighten.io, if we're hearing and seeing a lot of suffering across people from all different places globally, the same kinds of needs, it's a priority for us. And so a lot of our spin-outs around social is just, there's a lot of like hot areas that are just, there's so much need. So for us, it's really about having a separate entity and a separate unit that is helping and supporting us in our work. I feel like I don't really see that a lot in the venture space, or those that are really incubating is kind of really drawing from the research. The research is out there. The signals are out there. It's really about, are we listening to that? Are we kind of pulling back from our ego, from what it is that we want to build, what we want to see, from our own worldview, and kind of listening and saying, okay, how can we be of service to the market? And so that's essentially our kind of methodology, is having, a group that is very much so about pulling together those data sources. It's not always easy to be able to pull together that data in a very structured way. That's kind of the challenge that we're facing, but ultimately, that's how we're leveraging data to help inform our work.
I'm curious how that, in turn applies from, transition from something that's built for humans to something that's built for the planet, how that applies. How do you use these technologies to basically churn something that makes environmental progress better? And maybe you can speak to that.
Sure. So what I would actually say, so the Braid theory we have our own methodology as well when we work with so many early stage companies. And one key piece of our methodology is really looking at cross industry sectors for solutions and how they apply in other industry sectors, or this more systems thinking. So when we look at it, we're looking at solutions that might become coming from aerospace, that might be coming from biotech, that might be coming looking at the human side and where they apply on, you know, a whole other, solving a whole other issue. So it's really a lot about pattern recognition, about understanding models. It's understanding how systems work, very much systems thinking. And so I think I'm just going to start with an example. So you mentioned about vaccines. We have a company that we work with that started out being able to detect arsenic in drinking water using a biotech methodology. I won't say SynBio. I won't go into the details of the tech. We worked with them around and have applications now to be able to detect heavy metals in industrial stormwater so that you can better keep this industrial waste from coming into the ocean. And interesting, the same company and the same methodology has recently received and is getting some good progress in being able to sample for viruses in water in wastewater systems in a municipal level to be able to predict where there's going to be future outbreaks of COVID-19. So you start looking at these. So what I think we bring to the table in terms of how to extrapolate, explore, and influence future outcomes is to really think outside the box of what you're solving for. And take systems and solutions that are in one area and apply way beyond what the original designers may have even thought about.
And maybe a good way to phrase it with you, Anita, is, you know, how can what you're working on, your technologies, like how can that scope widen in the future potentially? Like how can that be applied in the future and influence other products developing?
Yeah, so that's a great point, and I think the best way to think about decarbonizing aviation is just that way, is the evolutionary use case. Because just like with people, you have to crawl before you can walk, before you can run, before you can fly. And so just like when you're implementing new technologies into the transport sector, you start with something which you can roll out quickly, get your product to market, good go-to-market strategy, get people using it, get people adopting it, build out the infrastructure, and you get bigger and bigger. So when you think about that from a decarbonizing aviation perspective, you want to start with small aircraft first and work your way up. And so what we're focused on is a modular power plant that can power small airplanes first because it's inexpensive. They're probably the ones that will be easiest to actually implement a new type of infrastructure at a general aviation airport, for example. And then when you get that working, then you can build it out eventually to regional platforms. We actually just spent the whole last semester with my student research, because I'm also a professor, looking at the carbon output from the global aviation sector in terms of different transatlantic, trans-Pacific routes within countries, looking at cargo versus people carrying. And the way you get your biggest bang for the buck here in the United States is to address regional travel, right? Which are shorter hops between, you know, a city in one state to a city in a nearby state, or even cities within the same state like California. So you can use data to inform your decision as to what's the right way to make the biggest bang for the buck. And that ultimately comes back to what Anne just said, which is systems thinking. So systems engineering is a discipline of engineering where you can do incredibly complex things by breaking it down and figuring out where the sensitivities of the system are. And sometimes people wonder, how is it that NASA is able to do these really cool things like landing rovers on Mars and having helicopters fly on Mars? It's by using the discipline of systems engineering, where you can do something really complicated if you break it up into its pieces. And in the context of decarbonizing aviation, it's focusing on how do we make the biggest impact now to reduce CO2 with an evolutionary use case, which is the way we're doing it with Hydroplane.
Amazing. Well, great. I think we can go ahead and move on to Q&A. Thank you so much for a really stimulating conversation. And Oleha, maybe you can bring us into the Q&A session here.
Yeah, let me just double check. Oh, there's a handful of Q&As.
Looks like they're weighted by votes, so we could.
Oh, there's votes. Amazing. Oh, pick Lee first. Okay. Yeah, so this question is from Lee Christie, who's the co-founder of MistyWest. And his question is, in a world where we have experienced decades of anger towards corporations with large R&D budgets, who recoups those costs long-term via patents and other first mover advantages? Hold on a second. Who would recoup those costs long-term? I might be,
I feel like
this was a phrase very accurately. Who would recoup those costs? How do we continue to incentivize innovation? Did that make sense? I have to, I think there's a period that's missing in here, and yeah.
Okay,
So yeah, in a world where
basically-
we've experienced decades of anger, corporations, yeah. Okay.
I didn't understand the question.
I think Lee is asking. Oh, sorry, Anne. I was gonna-
voice from above.
Just how do we incentivize innovation? And
Thank you,
Yeah,
Madison.
I
I'm
think
like,
Lee is pointing out that like everybody is really mad about like patent hoarding, especially from corporations with really large R&D budgets like Microsoft and like Bill Gates. So how do we continue to incentivize innovation around this when we are feeling a little bit disheartened that all this work is being put in, but the solutions are not being implemented, they're not being given to the people?
Well, I mean, I personally think it depends, because when I look at it in the ground-based transportation space, when I was at Hyperloop, and then when I look at it now in the aviation space, the big companies aren't doing much, actually. So they're doing very little on an R&D front, and they're doing everything they can probably to prevent too much change, because then they would lose, their portion of the market share. So in this case, that model, that sort of like corporate hoarding model, enables disruption, enables new companies to come out and do something totally different, which can take all their business away. So ironically, if you're really smart about it, you can use that disruptive model as a means of getting around them. That being said, I think it's really unfortunate that companies who have all these resources, who have the ability to put in capital, aren't making those right choices to actually push forward these technologies. So I think, from my sector perspective, big aerospace just isn't doing much on this front. But that being said, if they were to give me money, for example, that would help a lot, right? So I think that's a way where if there was a better distribution of capital towards things which would benefit the environment, and maybe there was a government incentive to give Boeing a huge tax break if they go and give money to startups in this area, that would be good. But certainly there's an element of you can't really compete against the big guys. And the best example for that in aerospace space would be SpaceX, where SpaceX was able to take off because, one, they had their own angel investor, Elon Musk, and they did get $1 billion government investment with sort of like the ISS resupply. So that's the way they got around that big corporate model. But ultimately, if you're too small to get into the game because you don't have the capital, then you're dead in the water.
Right, so you guys
And I
just
would
need a
also
multi-billion-dollar
say that-
investor to get you guys off the ground, and then you're set.
Yes.
So without that multi-billion-dollar investor, a couple of interesting trends that are happening on it, and a lot of, Anita touched about the agility and the speed of the startup is in our favor, right? So if you look historically from the 1920s to the current time, the length of time that a public corporation stays in the Fortune 500 is declining really, really rapidly. The disruption in every industry sector is causing the downfall of many, many big players. And, I don't care if you talk about Kodak or everybody has their sort of favorite stories of a large corporation that never thought they could come down that is being disrupted. So I think that's one thing that's going on. Specifically to Canada, we do a work with the Canadian government in the ocean tech space, and the Canadian government has put in $350 million to Canada's ocean supercluster, which is, yes, there are a lot of programs that combine the industry partnership with the entrepreneur, with the research to try to move it forward. But what's also happening is they're growing a huge pipeline of individuals and startups who are seeing that they can get some seed funding to get that next step, so that they don't necessarily have an Elon Musk around them, but some of that early, there's a lot of funding going on. You know, in the US, of course, you have the SBAR or STTR, but a lot of it is more of really, you know, focusing, just looking at the changes in market forces. It's not just about the money, right? Market forces are being, people are much more receptive to saying status quo is no good. And so they're actively looking for solutions in new transportation, like what Anita's doing, or mind-blowing thinking about how to really harness the power of the human brain, right? What you're talking about, Irene.
I feel like that flows well into the next weighted question here, which is kind of, you know, we're not working in organizations where we have billion-dollar funding, and so resources are kind of spread thin. So you have to prioritize on what you're focusing on and what's going to have the most impact. So maybe, Irene, you can start with this question of, you know, what's your viewpoint on how to set priorities and making sure that you're getting the most bang for your buck, per se, with what you're doing?
Definitely. No, it's a really good question around prioritization. For us, the first piece, like I mentioned before, is kind of pulling from Enlighten.io and understanding what are the priorities in terms of the market, right? We had to push back Meta, for example, understanding that the market readiness wasn't there yet, right? So that's kind of further back in our pipeline for us. But part of, at least for me, you know, being in this space, I had to really get scrappy and really understand. I don't come from privilege. I don't have a $1 billion angel investor. Part of it was understanding that we as people have power, right? And I had to start thinking about, okay, it's less about what is it that I want to build, because sometimes what I want to build, you know, it's not always tangible at the moment, right? It wasn't tangible for us to build Meta, and the market wasn't there. I started to move away from that, kind of always kind of dreaming about what it is that I wanted to build, and started getting down into like, okay, what can I build? What can I build with the resources that I have available to me, right? With the people power that I have around me, what can we come together to build, right? And how to kind of even just completely outplay the corporate entities that have all these billions and millions of dollars for R&D, for whatever it is that they want. They can't innovate as fast as we can. They also don't have that level of insight that I feel like a lot of us have. And you know, it's about the genius, right, around us. We can come together, and part of our methodology and what we're building for each of our spinouts is they all are backed by true consumer movements, right? And so it's about tapping into and inspiring people what it is that we're building, right? And kind of creating that awareness to say, you know, this is what needs to be built, right? And this is what we can build. So I think it's a little bit about getting scrappy and just prioritizing based upon what kinds of solutions, you know, the market timing, making sure the market timing is right, and also making sure that, you know, we can pull together our resources to make it happen. I think there's a lot of tools now for startups, et cetera, a lot of resources for us to, you know, very cheaply too, not necessarily with a ton of capital, but to be able to build these solutions. So I think kind of, you know, not necessarily scaling back, but just understanding how to create stepping stones for ourselves. And if you're working on very capital intensive deep tech projects, you know, really beginning to kind of build out, I think, a true movement. Everybody, all investors want to see is traction, but I think if you have the power of the people behind you, right, and you can show that there is a true market need for whatever solution you're building, I think that's going to be where value can be created, and making it feasible, taking it one step at a time, but it is possible. We just have to get really resourceful and really scrappy and gritty.
And you know, your point about scrappy is exactly right. It's about leveraging the resources, not feeling like you have to create everything. Yeah, Irene, like you're saying, there's so many tools available. There's other complementary companies, that there's co-optation models and strategic partnerships. And and I'm seeing that is completely different than that corporate mentality and mindset of having to control everything. And that's how you can, again, use that scrapper mentality to really just make huge traction really quickly with very little resources. It's a complete mind shift from a corporate, from when I worked in corporate.
And that's our power, right?
The one thing I'll add to that, and I completely agree with both Anne and Irene. And Irene, I love your introductory remarks. I think you should turn them into like a TED Talk. That's actually cool. Not what I want, but what I need to do. So I like that. Those are inspiring. But I have very different perspective because as an engineer, when someone gives me a constraint, I'm so happy because it's like, oh, I know something that I can or I can't do. And so I can live within that. And so one very obvious constraint for anybody in the entrepreneurial space is a funding constraint. And so you use that as your primary constraint because money is a resource just like mass and power, and you work within that. And of course you have customers. You figure out what your customer wants. Once you figure out what your customer wants, you convert that into a requirement and you work to that. So for us, our customer is the Air Force. We know exactly what the customer wants. We know what the customer needs in terms of their use cases. And then we look for ways to find synergies between that customer and other potential customers so that we're really efficient with our money, where we're getting multiple bangs for the same buck because we're giving everybody what they want within that constraint of funding. And oftentimes, as long as you have those kinds of conversations with your customer, whether that's a government customer, an actual customer, or an investor, they'll understand what your constraints are, and then you can kind of adjust your deliveries, your delivery timeline. You can even have ways where you de-scope things to fit within that funding constraint. But this all comes from like how one does NASA program management in a funding constrained world, which sometimes they aren't, but sometimes when they are, then you can kind of live within that.
Awesome. All right, this next question, can I be trusted to read another question? So this is around data and trust, which in itself could be an entirely its own webinar. So, we have a lot of data. We can find correlations through ML and AI algorithms, but sometimes we do not have causality. So there's a little bit of a distrust with scientists. And so this question is posed from a data scientist is, what can we data scientists and engineers do to gain that trust back? So whoever wants to.
Transparency. I think that's really the key is, creating opportunities where people can just understand. I think radical transparency is going to be the key. For one of our spinouts, we're going to have on our site like a real live ticker as to how many people have signed up into the platform, like how many folks we have in, on the platform itself, right? And so just in general, I think doing things like that and creating opportunities for there to be radical transparency, I think is everything. Making sure that it's, people can digest what it is, the information at hand, build that trust. I think it's only through transparency and, through that ability for people to tap in and really kind of see behind the veil, I think is where we can build that trust when it comes to data and privacy. You think about privacy laws and kind of the user experience around privacy, we've just been kind of conditioned to just click yes. But I think we need to, even in terms of on a legal perspective, how kind of phrasing the clauses for our users around privacy, et cetera, how we're using our data, make it very simple, make it very plain for people to digest and fully understand what's really going on. I think when we have transparency, then trust can be built. And I think that it enables people to come in and really feel like a stakeholder and not just, a product themselves, right? So that would be my answer to that.
Yeah, I like that transparency.
So one thing that's really interesting that, and really good question, by the way, relating correlation and causality. So when it comes to the big climate change debate, right? I would actually say in some cases, who cares about causality if you can do correlation and then use the data to inform where you put your funding for solutions? So, for example, we know that there are more extreme weather events. I don't care if it's caused by climate change, by CO2 in some way, but I do care if I have to rethink how we're going to keep Miami from being wiped off the planet. And all the communities, in low-lying coastal communities like New Orleans, who are still suffering decades later. Do we really have to label what the cause is, or do we look at the data and the correlation to help us better figure out solutions? Just, I put it out there, because sometimes when you start trying to look at, in some ways, on the root causes of things, you waste time that we don't have.
One thing I would add to the remarks of Anne and Irene, which I 100% agree with as well, is it's a difficult situation right now, right? Because there was a period of a couple of years where there was a lot of misinformation out there, and so people are responding to that era of misinformation. There's a lot of distrust which comes from corporate entities, something that starts with an F, right? With relating to like how people's data is being used and how people might be manipulated. So I think there's a lot of that in the background. So sadly, we've all been caught up in that storm because we're in that space. But just as Irene said, transparency is key. And so what you're seeing is, lack of public trust, maybe due to a lack of public awareness, a lack of public engagement. And the only way you can get public acceptance of anything is to engage with the public and give them all the information, which is what, Irene just said. So I think, in the case of what I do for aviation oftentimes is felt with a lot of opposition because people don't like airports. You have to be able to show why what you're doing is actually going to help them as well. So how it's all part of a solution which involves them. But I think we're starting from a backdrop of a difficult 4 years where there was a lot of misinformation. So I think we all have a responsibility now to go around and try and be as honest and transparent as we can in our respective areas of technical expertise. And we've all seen it with friends who don't want to get vaccinated, right? That's a great example of it. I spent weeks working on my mother to get her to get the vaccine, and she finally got it. So.
But I think what you're saying too, Anita, is like we have to, it's transparency, yes, but I think also involving us, right, or involving the consumer or the end user in the process too. I think we're maybe not doing that enough in these different sectors, is also kind of inviting people or having that open line of communication to say, participate, right? I think in the process. For me, the distrust that I have around vaccines is like, well, I don't know what's in it. I wasn't there when it was created. I haven't seen that. There's no true kind of, insight into what's really happening and kind of opening that veil as to what's happening behind the scenes. There's no one inviting me in at all to even do that, right? So I think that's another piece as well to it.
Definitely.
It sounds like we have time for one more question. I think this one about big mistakes made with tech development seems the most relevant to all of us. So I'm going to ask that one of, what are things that you've noticed within tech development that you would like to correct for in the future? And, how do we implement what these mistakes teach us into planning the next decade and century? I think that's a good final question to go with.
I didn't quite understand the question.
So the question is essentially talking about all of the mistakes made within tech development. So, there's been a lot of application of technologies, and then we also have a lot of insights as to what went wrong when we applied those technologies. So maybe we kind of reflect on some of those mistakes and, how we can learn from those mistakes and plan for better solutions in the future. That clarifies it a little bit more.
I can make a really specific comment on that front, which is, and this might be a little bit of a cop-out, but I think oftentimes when new technologies come about, regulation just lags behind or simply doesn't exist in the context of e-commerce, and then everyone's playing catch-up, and then all these lawsuits happen, then new laws are formed. So I think that's a lot of the reason why you see a lot of mistakes. You saw that with Uber. You might see that with self-driving vehicles. You certainly see that in anything having to do with like online forums like Facebook. So maybe the tech company could also make more of a concerted effort up front to say, you know what? we're not regulated in the space. Why don't we go out and try and figure out what should happen, work with our local constituency, work with our state governments, our federal government, so that we're not trotting on each other, because it actually hurts you in the long run as a business when you go off and try and do something and then you get shut down because somebody installs a law which kills your now new business model. So I think it would actually be really mature and smart for new technology developers to actually take the first steps in making suggestions on what that regulation should be, because it will actually help to de-risk your company.
So I'll add to the conversation about the mistakes is just also again about designing within a vacuum. You've got to really engage every bit of your stakeholders, which includes government regulation, which includes your funders, which includes your end customer, but it also is the beyond stakeholders that are going to be impacted by your technology. So the communities where your technology is being implemented, the people that are going to be affected by it, you have to really think about that bigger ecosystem when you look at how you design. And then that becomes in the voices have to come from many different sources, not just those who are paying for your product.
Definitely. And I think a lot of tech companies, they do that kind of research in the very beginning of the product's rollout, right? Maybe the first couple of months, the first year or so, there's that kind of feedback loop happening with, oh, we're getting insights and data, right, as to how people are, implementing this product or this emerging tech into their lives, right? A lot of that is kind of done in the very beginning, but I don't think that is consistent throughout the lifespan of the product. And I think that's the challenge too, is because, in the first year of, I think about social media as being an emerging technology. I think that it was something that hadn't been researched, hadn't been studied before, and it was just kind of rolled out literally to the mass consumer market. And there might have been some studies in the very beginning for a lot of the companies as to what was going on and how users were using a product, et cetera. But I think the longevity of just having that incorporated into the very DNA of the company, of always kind of getting that data and that feedback as to how people are utilizing this product and how it's impacting their lives, I think is critical, not just for that first year, that first year and a half, first 18 months, but for the entire lifespan, because things also, we're constantly developing as human beings. And so, and evolving. And I feel like it's also, what is the impact of this product long term, right? What is the impact of this product at 3 years of it being in the market, at 4 years, at 5 years, at 10 years, right? Because it's, especially if it's making a huge kind of mass impact and effect, I think we have the responsibility. Think about ethics. There's a lot of issues. Ethics and emerging technology could be its own panel as well, right? I think there's a lot of key pieces about how to design our companies to be ethical emerging tech companies, just inherently in the design of all of our workflows and how we design our operations, I think is going to be really key, because what may happen in the first year of people adopting your technology, there may be some serious impacts and effects years later that no one has even foreseen. So I think just constantly understanding that this is all one big experiment. We might have an understanding, and we might even have the best of intentions, right, with building emerging technologies or transformative technologies. Myself, really, and the types of spinouts that we're working on all have the impact lens, but even having an impact lens isn't enough, right? I think we have to make sure that we also have those checks and balances for ourselves to make sure that our product is, the impact that it's creating is as was intended, right? And the efficacy is still there even years down the line. These are some great questions, honestly. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, everyone's very active in the chat, so I appreciate that. Fantastic. I think this has been a great discussion, and I think it could be inspiration for, several series of talks about technology and essentially how we can do better. So thanks everyone for being involved, and yeah, just a big round of applause in the chat.
Yeah. And I think Madison may have, some closing announcements and slides to present.
Yeah, I was going to present slides, but that means having to boot somebody off of the screen again. So I'm just going to talk because it's easier I can read what I can see everything and flip back and forth. I really want to thank Core 77 and specifically Allison for helping organize this event. It was super successful, and it was great that we were able to utilize your massive audience and network to get the word out there. And that we were able to get such a incredible range of expertise and experience and knowledge on this panel. So I'm going to list everybody's names again, just so we have them. But thank you so much to Dr. Anita Gupta, to Anne Carpenter, and to Irene Atkins. I think that as far as my role as the host in this event, this is the most engaged that I've been in all of our hardware meetups. And I want to give a huge thanks as well. I don't want to forget Oleha, obviously. So, Oleha played a huge role in this too, and I'm really glad that I was able to bring her on and have her involved in this event. I hope I can get you involved in some other Vancouver hardware meetups in the future as well. And one last thing that I just wanted to announce is that MistyWest is hiring a technical project manager. And I was just informed by my colleague that we are also opening up, we're going to be looking for a systems engineer to join our team. I'm going to drop MistyWest's Workable account into the live chat. So if anybody is interested in potentially working with MistyWest in the future, you can go ahead and take a look here. And what was the last thing? Oh yeah, and I'm going to let each panelist do their round of outros as well, and any links you guys want to drop into the chat as well. I have Anita's promo video that she shared with me that I can share as well. So alphabetically, we'll let Anita go first.
Oh, well, thanks so much. I really enjoyed the conversation, and it's such an honor to be with all of you today. And if you want to engage with me further on this topic, Twitter is probably the best way to reach me, which I put in the chat window, Dr._Astro. And I'm always looking for ways to collaborate and partner with people in the sustainable transportation space. So please do reach out. Thank you.
All right, I guess I'm next. So same thing, I put our company's Twitter in the chat, Braid Theory. We're also very active on Clubhouse and run rooms on Ocean Enterprise Collective, really showcasing just the vast amount of solutions that are out there related to the blue economy, blue tech, oceans. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn. I'm always willing to have a conversation with people on collaboration opportunities, helping connect you to resources.
And really quickly, I'll go. So yes, definitely please reach out to me via email. I'll drop my email in the chat. I'm always looking for designers, engineers, operators. We're definitely going to be putting out a call for operators to come in and really own our spinouts as CEOs, as COOs, as also chief product officers. So anyone that's really, focused on and interested in creating these kind of the next generation of unicorns, I call them, and just really focused on creating paradigm shifts on a global scale within any kind of, when you think about the future of self, social, or space, physical space as well, that's going to be really key if you're an engineer or a builder or a founder. Also with IP, we also have a buy and build strategy as well. So we do buy assets, we do buy early stage startup companies and help to kind of, essentially put them into the market with a new go-to-market strategy. Please contact me. I'm always open for inquiries on that as well. So Yeah, I'm also a venture designer as well. So I design brands, products, business models. If any entities that are out there that are looking for some kind of paradigm shifting strategy around how to kind of deeply incubate your own project, please feel free to reach out. I'm excited to kind of hear and kind of learn more from the audience. I feel like just gauging by the questions, I think there's some paradigm shifters out there. So let me drop my email in the chat. But thank you. This has been wonderful.
Absolutely. And I just wanted to give a shout out for Core 77 as well. There are a lot of practitioners in the chat. You can tell from the very advanced questions. So if anyone has ideas for stories, if they want to collaborate, please feel free to email me at allison@core77.com, and I'm very open to discussion. So that's all from me.
Cool. I'm going to add the hardware meetup link. I know that Madison's already posted some links.
Thank you.
But,
I was just about to include my email. So yes, do the rest of that because I forgot that.
Yeah, cool. Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.